They say an Englishman's home is his castle. That's a nice thought. Quaint. Probably written by some lord who had an actual moat and a few hundred peasants to keep the riffraff out. For me, a modern suburban American male, my equivalent is the garage. It's my bat cave, my fortress of solitude. My own private Area 51, where the only aliens are the weird spiders that build webs in the corners, and the only government secrets are the user manuals for power tools I've long since lost. My garage is the one place on this god-forsaken patch of manicured grass and HOA-approved beige siding where I am king. It's the one place where the color of my mailbox is my decision, and my decision alone, where the precise curvature of my garden hose is not subject to a 12-page subsection in a 3-ring binder, and where I can be surrounded by the glorious, beautiful, organized chaos of my own projects. Or so I thought. See, I live in Oakwood Creek Estates. It sounds pleasant, doesn't it? Like a place where deer gently sip from a babbling brook while bluebirds sing on your shoulder. The reality is less Disney and more dystopian bureaucracy. Oakwood Creek is governed by a homeowners association, and the HOA is governed by a woman named Brenda. To say Brenda wields her minor power as HOA president like a tin pot dictator would be an insult to tin pot dictators, who at least occasionally have to deal with a coup. Brenda's reign is absolute, her authority unquestioned. She patrols the pristine sidewalks armed with a clipboard, a measuring tape, and a soul-crushing sense of purpose. She sees the world not in shades of gray, but in shades of compliance and violation. A stray leaf on your lawn? That's a paddlin'. A garbage can left out 1.3 hours past the designated 6 p.m. collection window? Believe it or not, also a paddlin', in the form of a crisp $25 fine, a passive-aggressive note, and your name being added to the community watch list in the monthly newsletter. I learned this the hard way last summer when I was cited for my garden hose being excessively coiled, not improperly stored, excessively coiled. Apparently, its helical structure was too tight, creating what she termed a visual nuisance and potential trip hazard. I stared at the violation notice for a solid 5 minutes, trying to comprehend the level of cosmic boredom one must achieve to measure the coil width of a neighbor's hose. But I paid the fine. I kept my head down. I'm a peaceful man. I'm an engineer. I like solvable problems with logical solutions. Brenda was an unsolvable problem, a glitch in the suburban matrix. So I treated her like one. I created a workaround. I stayed in my garage, minded my own business, and focused on things that made sense, like my current project, a complete frame-off restoration of a 1991 The Addams Family pinball machine. I'd found it in a barn, covered in dust and chicken, well, let's just call it chicken debris. For 3 months, I had been lovingly rewiring its circuits, polishing its chrome, and recalibrating its flippers. It was my magnum opus of recreational engineering. And on this particular Tuesday morning, it was almost done. I had just finished reinstalling the main ramp, the one that leads to the electric chair. All I needed was one final, crucial part. I'd been chasing it for weeks, a 7/16 inches flipper bushing, a tiny, insignificant piece of nylon that had cracked on the upper right flipper, giving it a dissatisfying, mushy feel. But I'd found one. The last one in the state, probably. At a place called Pinball Paraphernalia, a dusty little shop on the other side of town run by a guy who looked like he'd been living on a diet of solder fumes and tab soda since 1982. He had it. He was holding it for me. But he closed in 2 hours. The stakes, in the grand scheme of human existence, were microscopically low. But in my world, in the sacred space of my garage, they were everything. This wasn't just a bushing. It was the final infinity stone for my gauntlet of fun. I wiped my hands on a rag, a deep sense of satisfaction washing over me. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and hit the big red button for the garage door opener. The motor whirred to life, a familiar, comforting sound. The door began its ascent to freedom, and then with a sickening thud it stopped. The door was only about 3 feet up, jammed. I frowned. That wasn't right. I'd serviced the chain drive last month. I ducked down and peered into the slice of daylight, and my blood ran cold. There, not 2 inches from my garage door, was a bumper. A gleaming, pristine, sanctimonious white bumper. The bumper of a Toyota Prius. Brenda's Prius. Parked directly, perfectly, and with undeniable, malicious intent, right behind my door, blocking me in completely. You know that feeling of pure, unadulterated rage that bubbles up from a place deep within your soul? The kind of fury our ancestors felt when a saber-toothed tiger stole their mammoth carcass? I felt that, but for a Prius. I could see her, standing on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, pretending to inspect the birdbath of my neighbor, Mr. Henderson. The trap had been set. I slid under the door and stood up, brushing the dust from my jeans. I took a deep, calming breath, telling myself to be the bigger person. "Brenda," I called out, my voice dangerously even. She turned slowly, feigning surprise. "Mark, good morning." There appears to be a mid-sized sedan experiencing a critical parking failure directly in front of my garage. She glanced at her car, then back at her clipboard. "That's my vehicle, Mark, and it's parked there for a reason." "A reason that prevents the basic operation of my garage door." "I'm conducting an official HOA audit of your driveway's oil stain compliance," she said, her voice dripping with smug authority. She tapped her pen on the paper. "Section 4, subsection B, paragraph 3. All driveways must be free of automotive fluid stains exceeding 3 inches in diameter." I needed to get a closer look. I looked down at my driveway. It was spotless. I was meticulous about that sort of thing. "You're auditing my non-existent oil stains? By blocking me in? Brenda, I need to leave. It's important." "The audit takes as long as it takes," she sniffed. "Your personal schedule isn't an HOA-sanctioned priority." "How long?" I asked through gritted teeth. She gave a dismissive little shrug. "An hour, maybe 2? It depends on the complexity of the stain patterns." And that was it. That was the moment. I could feel the gears of rational thought grinding to a halt in my brain. The carefully constructed walls of being the bigger person and choosing my battles crumbled into dust. In their place, a single, massive, gleaming red lever labeled Nuclear Option presented itself. And with the quiet calm of a man who had been pushed 1 inch too far, I mentally reached out and slammed that lever all the way down. She wanted to play by the rules? Fine, we'd play by my rules. The ones involving high-torque servos, weaponized pettiness, and a complete and utter disregard for all known social norms. I gave her a tight, bloodless smile. "You know what, Brenda? You're right. Take all the time you need. Compliance is everything." I slid back under the garage door. As it descended, plunging me back into the cool darkness of my sanctuary, I could see the triumphant smirk on her face. She thought she'd won. She had no idea. The war had just begun. I paced the concrete floor of my garage like a caged animal. My mind was a whirlwind of options, a frantic slideshow of potential responses. Option 1, the normal response. Call a tow truck. I pulled out my phone and looked up the number for Billy's 24-hour towing. Estimated arrival time, 90 minutes. Cost, $150. And that was before I factored in the Brenda factor. She'd probably emerge the second the truck arrived, claiming it was an unauthorized commercial vehicle, and try to fine the driver for scuffing the curb. Too slow, too conventional, too Sane. Option 2. The law enforcement response. Call the police. I imagined the conversation. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, my neighbor has weaponized her Prius in a dispute over imaginary oil stains. They'd show up, sigh heavily, and tell us it was a civil matter. They couldn't force her to move it. It would be my word against the HOA president's. A bureaucratic stalemate. Useless. No. Normal options were for normal problems. This was an act of asymmetrical warfare. This called for a solution that was as petty, as absurd, and as technically over the top as her infraction. My eyes drifted to the corner of the garage, to the large, dusty canvas tarp covering a lumpy, mysterious shape. My heart began to beat a little faster. I hadn't planned to unveil it like this. I wasn't even sure what its ultimate purpose was. It was just a project. Something born from late nights, a surplus of parts from my engineering job, and a deep-seated belief that if a problem can't be solved with a robotic arm, you're not using a big enough robotic arm. I walked over and grabbed a corner of the tarp. With a theatrical flourish that was completely wasted on the audience of one, me, I pulled it back. There it sat, in all its ridiculous glory. Project Chimera. Officially, its designation was the Remote Environmental Assessment and Manipulation System, a name I'd come up with because it sounded important and used a lot of syllables. Unofficially, it was the most over-engineered cherry-picker/robotic crane/power washer ever conceived by a bored man with an Amazon Prime account and a working knowledge of hydraulics. It was my baby, my beautiful, monstrous, utterly pointless baby. Its base was a heavy-duty electric wheelchair I'd bought from a surplus auction. It provided silent, stable mobility. Bolted to that was a telescoping, articulated arm, scavenged from a professional tree-trimming tool, giving it about a 12-foot reach. At the end of that arm was my pride and joy. A high-powered gripping claw with 3 steel fingers and a pressure sensor, a component I had designed, 3D printed, and assembled myself. It was delicate enough to pick up an egg and strong enough to crush a paint can. For vision, I had rigged up a system of 4 small quadcopter drones, the eyes, that could be deployed to hover around a target, streaming a multi-angle video feed back to a refurbished medical monitor I'd mounted near the controls. The control panel itself was a masterpiece of unnecessary complexity. A beautiful mess of joysticks from a flight simulator, glowing toggle switches I'd bought from a specialty electronics store, and a big, beautiful, candy-like red button labeled Engage. And for pure, unadulterated psychological impact, I had added 2 final touches. A pair of bright yellow flashing hazard lights scavenged from a construction vehicle, and a small but powerful outdoor speaker that could play pre-recorded audio files from an SD card. I had built it with no clear purpose in mind. Maybe I'd use it to clean my gutters without a ladder. Maybe I'd use it to get things off the top shelf. Maybe it was just an excuse to see if I could. Until today. Today, Project Chimera had found its destiny. A new plan began to form in my mind, a plan of such beautiful, disproportionate absurdity that I almost laughed out loud. I wasn't just going to move her car. That was the thinking of a lesser man. I was going to treat her car as what it was, a hazardous contaminant, a biomechanical threat that required a full-scale, by-the-book, professional-looking response. My book. I strode over to a locker where I kept my painting supplies. I pulled out a set of white, disposable coveralls. Perfect. I found the respirator mask I used for spray painting. Even better. A pair of heavy rubber gloves and some safety goggles completed the ensemble. The pinball part was a distant memory now. This was no longer a simple errand. This was a performance. It was a statement. This was Operation Prius Extraction. And the curtain was about to rise. I took a moment to compose myself, to get into character. I was no longer Mark, the annoyed engineer. I was Mark, the lead technician of the Suburban Hazard Abatement Team. My mission was clear. My tools were ready. I flicked a master switch on the control panel. With a satisfying hum, Project Chimera powered on. The monitor flickered to life, displaying a boot-up sequence I had programmed myself. SHAT OSV-1. 0 initializing. I probably should have thought that acronym through a little more. Oh well, no time for regrets. I slipped on the respirator mask, the rubber seal cool against my face. I pulled the goggles down over my eyes and flipped another switch. The 2 yellow hazard lights began to flash, pulsing silently, bathing the garage in an eerie, rhythmic glow. The show was about to begin. Taking hold of the joysticks, I engaged the electric motors. With the silent, menacing whir of a predator, Project Chimera rolled forward. I piloted it carefully toward the half-open garage door, its robotic arm folded neatly at its side like a sleeping metal insect. I was a surgeon approaching the operating table, a bomb technician nearing the device. I guided it out from under the door and into the bright, judgmental sunlight of Oakwood Creek Estates. The effect was immediate and glorious. Mr. Henderson, who had since moved on from his bird bath to edging his lawn, stopped dead. His edger whined down to silence. He just stood there, mouth agape, a statue of suburban bewilderment. Across the street, a woman I didn't know was getting her mail. She froze, her hand hovering over her mailbox, her expression a perfect blend of confusion and fear. And then there was Brenda. She was still there, of course, clipboard in hand, pretending to make a detailed notation about a hairline crack in my concrete. She heard the whirring and looked up, her expression of smug satisfaction slowly melting away as her brain tried to process the scene unfolding before her. There was me, a figure clad head to toe in white, face obscured by a gas mask. And there was my creation, my flashing, whirring robotic monstrosity, now positioned ominously in my driveway. The key to this kind of operation is confidence. You can't act like you're doing something weird. You have to act like this is the most normal, routine thing in the world. As if every suburban homeowner has a detailed, multi-step protocol for unsanctioned vehicular contaminant removal. "Mark," she finally sputtered, finding her voice. "What in God's name is that thing? What are you doing?" I didn't answer immediately. First, I reached for the drone deployment switch. One by one, the 4 quadcopters lifted off from their perches on Chimera's base. They buzzed into the air like a swarm of angry mechanical hornets, circling her Prius, their tiny camera lenses glinting in the sun. On my monitor, I now had 4 distinct angles of the target vehicle. I adjusted the microphone on my respirator and spoke, my voice coming out flat, distorted, and wonderfully official sounding. "Ma'am, please stand back. We have a potential biomechanical hazard in a designated residential zone." I paused for effect. "I'm initiating Protocol 7. For your safety, please remain at least 50 feet from the containment area." "Containment area? Protocol 7? She shrieked. "That's my car! You can't touch my car!" I ignored her. I selected an audio file from my SD card and hit play. From the speaker on Project Chimera, a calm, robotic female voice announced to the neighborhood, "Warning. Unidentified vehicle poses a Level 3 compliance risk. Prepare for extraction." Brenda's face went from pale to beet red. "Level 3? You're making this up." Was I? Yes. But was she going to prove it? Unlikely. With my left hand, I manipulated the joystick that controlled the main arm. It rose smoothly, unfolding itself, extending out over her car like a great metal raptor. With my right hand, I controlled the claw, which opened slowly, its 3 steel fingers ready to grip. The scene was pure, calculated, suburban theater, and it was playing to an increasingly large audience as more neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains. This was even better than getting the pinball part. Brenda did exactly what I knew she would do. Her face contorted with rage, she fumbled for her phone in her purse. I could hear her frantic, high-pitched voice as she stabbed at the screen. "Yes, 911. I need the police. I need everyone. There's a madman in a spacesuit. He has some kind of bomb robot and he's attacking my car. Oakwood Creek Estates. Hurry!" I almost felt a pang of sympathy for the dispatcher on the other end of that call. Almost. I continued my work, unperturbed. The claw hovered over the roof of her Prius. I wasn't actually going to grab it from there. The sheet metal was too thin. I was just positioning. It was all about the optics of the situation. I needed to look like I knew exactly what I was doing. Within 5 minutes, I heard the distant but rapidly approaching wail of a siren. A squad car, its lights flashing, turned onto our street and screeched to a halt a safe distance away. 2 officers emerged, their hands cautiously near their sidearms. They looked tense, as they should be responding to a bomb robot call. The officers were a classic pair. One was older, with a weary face that suggested he'd seen every form of human stupidity and was profoundly tired of it. This was Dave. The other was younger, fitter, with a by-the-book haircut and an expression of intense alertness. This was Gary. They took in the scene. Me, in the full white suit and respirator. The bizarre, flashing machine with its menacing arm extended over a Prius. The small drones buzzing in the air. A hysterical woman pointing and shouting. And a growing gallery of neighbors trying to look casual while filming the whole thing on their phones. I could see the exact moment Officer Dave's will to live left his body. It was somewhere between noticing my respirator and seeing the robotic claw gently descend to polish Brenda's hubcap with a small microfiber cloth I had cleverly attached to one finger. "Okay," Dave said, his voice a low grumble of pure exhaustion. He stopped about 20 feet away. "Son, what is going on here?" I turned my masked face toward him. "Officer, thank you for arriving. I've established a sterile perimeter. This vehicle," I said, gesturing with the claw, "is in direct violation of local ordinance, my ordinance, and poses a significant obstructional hazard. The situation is under control." Gary, the younger cop, took a step forward. "Is that a hazmat suit?" "It's a Class C particulate matter abatement ensemble," I replied, the jargon rolling beautifully off my tongue. "Standard issue for this kind of procedure. Wouldn't want to get any Prius on me." Dave pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture of a man in deep spiritual pain. He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, is this your car?" "Yes," she shrieked, "and he's a maniac. He's going to destroy it with his death machine." Dave sighed. It was a sigh that contained multitudes. It contained traffic stops, domestic disputes, and 1,000 other calls just like this one. "Ma'am, is there a reason your car is blocking this gentleman's driveway?" "He knows the rules," Brenda shot back, completely avoiding the question. "No vehicle modifications visible from the street. He has a robot. That's a modification." I couldn't help but interject. "Objection, officer. Project Chimera is a tool, not a vehicle modification. It's no different than, say, a lawnmower. A very, very advanced lawnmower." Dave held up a hand. "Everybody, stop talking. Just for 1 second. Sir," he said, pointing a thumb at me, "can you just not do whatever this is?" Then he turned to Brenda. "And ma'am, can you just move your car?" This was the crux of it, the moment of truth. "I will not be intimidated," Brenda declared, crossing her arms. "He needs to be taught a lesson about following the rules of this community." "I am following the rules," I stated calmly. "My rules, for removing unauthorized obstructions from my property." The cops were stuck, and they knew it. I was on my own property. I hadn't actually touched her car yet, let alone damaged it. Moving a vehicle that's illegally blocking your driveway isn't a crime. It's what tow trucks do for a living. My methods were just unorthodox. Insane, even. But illegal? It was a beautiful, beautiful gray area. Dave and Gary exchanged a look. It was a silent, cop-to-cop conversation that probably went something like, "You want this one?" "Nope." "Me neither." "Pizza after shift?" "Yeah." Dave turned back to us. "Look, we're not an arbiter for the HOA. We're leaving. We'll drive around the block. When we come back in 10 minutes, we want the robot gone and the car gone. Figure it out." He didn't wait for a response. He and Gary got back in their squad car and drove away, leaving a cloud of bureaucratic surrender in their wake. It was a total victory. I had successfully out-weirded the law. Brenda stood there, sputtering, robbed of her authority. She had brought a clipboard to a robot fight, and she had lost. As the squad car disappeared around the corner and Brenda stood there fuming, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. It was like a thunderclap in my brain. Moving her car was tactical. It was a short-term win. But it didn't solve the fundamental problem. The problem was the garage itself. It was a standard single-car garage, a relic of a bygone era. It was a box, a cage for my ambitions. Brenda and her Prius weren't the enemy. They were just symptoms of the disease. The disease was conformity. It was beige walls and restrictive covenants, and the slow, creeping death of the human spirit in a sea of suburban sameness. The blockade wasn't an obstacle, it was a sign, a call to arms. And just like that, the 7/16 inches flipper bushing, the whole reason this farce had started was forgotten. It was a triviality. My quest had a new, grander purpose. This wasn't about getting out anymore. This was about expanding. This was about building a monument so glorious, so defiant of every petty HOA regulation, that Brenda would see it in her nightmares. I wasn't just going to move her car. I was going to move the whole front wall of my garage, outward. A slow smile spread across my face, hidden by the respirator. Phase 1 was complete. It was time to initiate Phase 2. First things first. I retracted the robotic arm and piloted Project Chimera to the side of my house, parking it discreetly. Then, I went into the garage and backed out my pickup truck, parking it on the street. I grabbed a heavy-duty tow strap, walked calmly to the front of Brenda's Prius, and knelt down. It took me less than 30 seconds to find a solid point on the frame and hook it on. I attached the other end to my truck's trailer hitch. Brenda watched, aghast. "You can't do that. That's illegal." "Is it, Brenda?" I asked, my voice still muffled. "Is it more illegal than holding me hostage in my own home?" I got in my truck. I put it in 4-wheel drive, low gear. And with the gentle, steady pressure of a surgeon, I began to ease forward. Her Prius, a vessel of pure hubris, was dragged unceremoniously, silently down the street. I moved it about 15 feet, parking it perfectly parallel to the curb, right in front of a fire hydrant. I unhooked the strap. Technically a problem for the fire department now, not me. My driveway was clear. I could leave. But I wasn't going anywhere. I walked back into my garage and emerged with a can of bright orange marking paint, the kind used by construction crews. I walked to the edge of my driveway, aimed the can at the concrete, and began to spray. I painted a long, straight line extending 10 feet out from the right side of the garage, then another line, 10 feet out from the left. I connected them with a third line, creating a large 3-sided rectangle on my driveway. Then I turned and sprayed corresponding lines up the front wall of my house. It was a crude, bright orange blueprint of my intention. The footprint of my new, glorious 2-car garage. I was finished. I walked to the center of the driveway, popped the top off the spray can, and turned to face Brenda. She stood there, frozen, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. Her tiny kingdom was crumbling. I reached up and pulled the respirator mask off my face, taking a deep, satisfying breath of free air. I gave her my widest, most cheerful smile. "Phase 1 complete, Brenda," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the stunned silence of the neighborhood. "Phase 2, a 2-car garage with a 2nd-story workshop. Don't worry, I'll send you the plans. I'm sure they're up to code." A man can't build a monument to spite by himself. He needs help. He needs concrete. He needs load-bearing beams. He needs professionals. But not just any professionals. I couldn't just call the first name in the phone book. I needed a specific breed of contractor. I needed a crew that wouldn't be spooked by a raving HOA president holding a camera phone. I needed a team that saw a cease and desist letter not as a legal threat, but as a challenge. I needed construction pirates. After an hour of searching online through forums with names like Build It Right and DIY or Die, I found my man. The ad was simple, no frills, set against a background of diamond plate. It read, "Sully & Sons Construction, no job too weird, no HOA too strict, we get it done." It had a phone number and nothing else. It was perfect. I called. A gravelly voice answered on the first ring. "Sully." "My name is Mark," I said. "I'm planning an aggressive garage expansion in what could best be described as a hostile regulatory environment." There was a pause, then a low chuckle on the other end of the line. "Hostile, you say? Son, you're speaking my language. Tell me more." Sully arrived the next morning. He drove a slightly rusted, mud-splattered Ford F-250 that looked like it ate Priuses for breakfast. He himself was a mountain of a man, with a thick gray beard, a booming laugh, and arms like oak trees. He swung himself out of the truck, took one look at the scene, the bright orange lines on my house and driveway, Brenda across the street pretending to garden but clearly filming us, and Project Chimera parked proudly by my side door and let out a roar of laughter. "So," he boomed, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to realign my spine, "I got your email. Aggressive garage expansion. I gotta say, son, you undersold it. This ain't a construction job. This is a masterpiece. I like your style." I showed him my plans. Not the spray-painted ones, but the actual detailed architectural drawings I had spent all night drafting. As an engineer, I was meticulous. Everything was to code. Every beam was calculated for load. Every foundation specification was by the book. It was an ironclad plan. "I need it done fast, I need it done right, and I need you to ignore any and all cease and desist letters that will inevitably start arriving," I said. Sully grinned, a flash of white in his beard. "That's what we call the hostile environment surcharge. 10%. "Done," I said without hesitation. "I like you," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was like a hydraulic press. "We'll start tomorrow." True to his word, the next morning at 7 a.m. sharp, the cavalry arrived. A mini excavator on a flatbed trailer, a dump truck, a concrete mixer, and Sully's crew, a motley but professional-looking bunch of guys who moved with the easy confidence of men who knew their craft. They saw Brenda, her face a mask of thunderous rage, and just smiled. They immediately fell in love with Project Chimera. "What is that glorious thing?" one of the younger guys, a kid named Marco, asked, his eyes wide. "That," I said, "is the Remote Environmental Assessment and Manipulation System." Sully let out another belly laugh. "We're calling it the Inspector. Looks like he's here to supervise." The name stuck. The work began. The sound of a jackhammer breaking up my old driveway was like a symphony of progress. It echoed through the serene, sleepy neighborhood, a beautiful, percussive declaration of war against the forces of beige. Each slam of the hammer was a nail in the coffin of Brenda's tyranny. The letters started arriving on day 2. Not in the mail. That would have been too civilized. Brenda delivered them herself, marching across the street at the end of each workday and taping a crisp, white envelope to my front door. The first was a fine for unapproved construction. Amount, $500. I didn't ignore it. That night, I typed up a formal response. I included a copy of my city-approved permit and a highlighted passage from the HOA bylaws that stated all construction must be in accordance with city regulations. I ended the letter with, "As my project is fully compliant with the city of Oakwood Creek, I can only assume this notice was sent in error. No further action is required on my part. Regards, Mark." I taped it to her door at 5 a.m. the next morning. The next day, another letter. A $200 fine for improperly parked commercial vehicles, referring to Sully's dump truck. My response was even more detailed. I argued that, according to the bylaw's own definition of a vehicle, a self-propelled device for use on public roadways, the dump truck, being parked entirely on my private property for the purpose of a contracted job, was not a parked vehicle in the legal sense, but rather stationary construction equipment. I included several legal precedents from obscure zoning disputes I'd found online. I also pointed out that her Prius had been parked in front of a fire hydrant for 36 hours and counting. This was followed by a noise complaint, a complaint about the dirt pile from the excavation, a complaint about the color of the porta-potty Sully had delivered, a visually jarring shade of blue, the notice read. I countered every single one with a fusillade of weaponized pedantry. For the noise complaint, I produced a decibel meter, reading showing Sully's jackhammer was, at peak operation, 4 decibels quieter than Mr. Henderson's new industrial-grade leaf blower, which Brenda herself had complimented him on last week. For the dirt pile, I argued it was a temporary geological feature, essential to the construction process. For the porta-potty, I sent back a single sheet of paper with the dictionary definition of the word temporary. My masterstroke came on day 4. I went to a print shop and had a large professional sign made. That evening, I hammered it into the center of my lawn. In tasteful HOA-approved font, it read, "Future home of the Oakwood Creek Estates. Memorial garage and workshop, in honor of free will and common sense, as to 2025. Brenda saw it the next morning. I watched from my window as she stood on her lawn, her whole body vibrating with a rage so pure it was almost visible, like heat haze off asphalt. The war of paperwork had failed her. The conflict was about to get personal. The foundation was poured by the end of the first week. The wooden frame began to go up. My garage was growing, taking shape, a beautiful skeleton of 2x4s and defiance. And as the structure grew, so did Brenda's desperation. She abandoned the pretense of legal procedure and moved on to active sabotage. Her first move was with water. She began a new, intensive sprinkler schedule. Her sprinkler heads, which had previously cast a gentle mist over her prize-winning azaleas, were suddenly recalibrated. Now, they fired powerful jets of water that arced high over her lawn and directly onto our construction site, turning the carefully graded dirt around the foundation into a soupy, unworkable mud pit. Sully took it in stride. "She's a feisty one, I'll give her that," he said, wiping mud from his boots. But I was not Sully, I was an engineer, and I had the inspector. That night, under the cover of darkness, I deployed one of my drones. This one wasn't for surveillance. I had modified it, attaching a tiny remote-controlled water pistol with its reservoir filled with a highly concentrated solution of salt water. I piloted the drone over her lawn, hovering silently over her meticulously cared-for, award-winning petunias. With pinpoint accuracy, I began a campaign of strategic chemical pruning. It wouldn't kill them overnight, but in a week, they'd be the saddest-looking flowers in Oakwood Creek. It was petty. It was beautiful. Her next move was to report me to the city. She must have spent hours on the phone, because the next day, a white city inspector's truck pulled up. A stern-looking man named George got out, holding a clipboard of his own. Brenda was waiting for him, practically vibrating with excitement. "Right there, officer," she said, pointing at my house. "He has no permits. It's an illegal structure. Shut him down." George the inspector walked over, looking unimpressed. "Let's see your permit, son." I smiled and handed him a thick folder. Inside were the architectural drawings, the structural engineering reports, the soil sample results, and on top, the big, beautiful, stamped and approved building permit from the city planning office. George spent 20 minutes looking everything over. He checked the rebar in the foundation. He measured the spacing of the wall studs. Finally, he turned, looked at me, and gave a curt nod. "Looks good. Everything's up to code." He then turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, these permits are all in order. Please stop wasting the city's time." The look on Brenda's face was worth more than any pinball machine. The war of attrition settled into a rhythm. Brenda would park her Prius down the street and just sit in it for hours, filming the workers with her phone, presumably hoping to catch a safety violation. In response, Sully's crew made it a game. They started wearing hard hats with goofy stickers on them. They'd strike dramatic poses whenever they saw her camera, flexing their muscles or pretending to be engaged in a Herculean struggle to lift a single 2x4. Marco, the apprentice, started editing the footage into a TikTok series called Garage Wars, set to epic movie music. The first episode got 12,000 views. Mark was becoming a local folk hero. The neighborhood, which had started as a silent audience, began to pick sides. The residents of the Brenda block would glare at the construction site as they power walked by. But a resistance was forming. People I barely knew started showing their support. Someone left a case of premium root beer on my porch for the crew. Mrs. Gable from 3 doors down, a sweet old lady who Brenda had once fined for having non-standard wind chimes, baked us a tray of brownies. I'd come out in the morning to find anonymous notes of encouragement tucked under my doormat. "Go, Mark, go," one read. Another just said, "Give her hell." This was bigger than my garage now. This was a revolution, and every revolution needs a final, decisive battle. Brenda was losing. She knew it. The walls of my magnificent new garage were up, the roof was on, and her campaign of petty sabotage had failed. Public opinion was turning against her. The garage wars. TikToks were now a local news story. She was no longer a respected community leader. She was a meme. Desperate, she played her final card. She called an emergency all-hands-on-deck HOA meeting at the community clubhouse. The agenda, printed on threateningly thick cardstock and delivered to every single home, was simple. A special vote to levy a punitive fine of $10,000 against homeowner Mark Petrie for ongoing violations and to seek a court-ordered injunction to halt and dismantle the illegal structure at 124 Oakwood Lane. Attendance wasn't just requested. It was mandated by community covenant. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. It felt less like a community gathering and more like a show trial. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. Brenda's remaining loyalists, the Beige Brigade, sat in the front rows, their faces grim. In the back, the silent majority, the people who had been fined for bird baths and basketball hoops, sat with arms crossed, their expressions unreadable. Sully and his entire crew showed up for moral support. They stood in the back, their muscular frames and work boots a stark contrast to the khaki and polo shirt crowd. Brenda stood at a podium, a projector screen behind her. She looked haggard but resolute, like a general preparing for one last charge. She tapped the microphone. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice tight. "We are here tonight because our community is facing a crisis, an existential threat to our values, our property values, and our very way of life." She clicked a button. The projector hummed to life, displaying the first slide of a PowerPoint presentation titled, "The Unraveling of Oakwood Creek, Anarchy at 124 Oakwood Lane." What followed was the most comprehensive, detailed, and obsessively documented takedown of a man building a garage in human history. She had charts of noise pollution, graphs showing the alleged decrease in curb appeal. She had aerial photos of my property, presumably taken from her bedroom window, with my violations circled in angry red marker. She had date-stamped photos of the visually jarring blue porta-potty. She spoke for 27 minutes, her voice rising in pitch and fury with each slide. "This is not just a garage," she concluded, her voice trembling with righteous rage. "It is a symbol of defiance, a middle finger to every rule that holds this community together. If we let this stand, what's next? People painting their houses purple? Cars parked on lawns? Chaos?" The Beige Brigade applauded enthusiastically. The rest of the room was silent. Then Brenda pointed a trembling finger at me. "The floor is now open for the accused to speak, though I can't imagine what defense he could possibly offer." I stood up. I didn't go to the podium. Instead, I walked to the front of the room, carrying a single yellowed piece of paper. I tacked it to the wall next to her projector screen. It was a scanned copy of the original Oakwood Creek Estates HOA covenant, dated 1978. "Brenda's right," I said, my voice calm and clear in the silent room. "I have broken a lot of her rules. She has the documents to prove it. But the thing about rules is they have to serve a purpose. They have to be reasonable." I tapped the old document on the wall. "I'd like to read from the original mission statement of this community, the one everyone signed when they first built these homes. To foster a friendly, safe, and pleasant environment for all residents, encouraging community pride and neighborly cooperation." I let the words hang in the air. That's it. That's the foundation of this entire HOA. It doesn't say anything about hose coiling. It doesn't mention porta-potty aesthetics or driveway audits. It says friendly, pleasant, and cooperation. I turned to the crowd. "Forget my garage for a second. Let's talk about what it's actually like to live here. Let's talk about being friendly and pleasant. Who here has ever received a violation notice from Brenda?" A few hesitant hands went up. "Keep them up," I said gently. "Now, who here has been fined for something that a reasonable person would consider ridiculous? A basketball hoop being 1 inch too close to the sidewalk? A holiday decoration left up 1 day too long? Wind chimes being too, I don't know, chimey?" More hands went up, dozens of them, a forest of frustrated hands. The dam broke. Mr. Henderson stood up. "She fined me because my garbage can had a scratch on it, called it unsightly." Mrs. Gable, the brownie baker, stood as well, her voice shaking slightly. "She made my daughter take down a get well soon sign for her grandfather because it wasn't a pre-approved sign type." One by one, people started standing up, airing years of pent-up grievances. The meeting had completely derailed. It was no longer a hearing about my garage. It was a mass testimonial about Brenda's reign of terror. She stood at the podium, her face ashen, as her power dissolved before her very eyes. The room was buzzing, a chorus of angry, liberated voices. Brenda hammered the gavel, but no one was listening. The Beige Brigade looked deeply uncomfortable. This was not how the trial was supposed to go. Then, from the back of the room, A voice boomed over the chaos. It was Sully. He wasn't shouting, but his voice cut through the noise like a chainsaw through drywall. "Sounds to me like you folks don't have a problem with this guy's garage," he called out, gesturing to me. "You have a problem with your president." A sudden, shocked silence fell over the room. He was right. He had put words to the feeling that had been simmering for years. A man I'd never seen before, a quiet-looking accountant from the next street over, stood up. He cleared his throat nervously, but his voice was firm. "I agree," he said. I think we've all had enough. According to Section 12 of the bylaws, a special vote can be called at any meeting with a quorum present. I'd like to make a motion. I move for a vote of no confidence in Brenda's leadership as HOA president." The room erupted. It was a coup, a full-blown suburban coup. "You can't do that!" Brenda shrieked, banging the gavel frantically. "This is out of order. The agenda is the garage." "The agenda is whatever we, the homeowners, say it is," someone shouted back. The accountant, now emboldened, pressed on. "All in favor of holding a vote of no confidence." Nearly every hand in the room shot up. The motion passed overwhelmingly. Paper ballots were quickly torn from notebooks. People wrote their yes or no votes and dropped them into a cardboard box. The mood was electric, a strange mix of giddy and solemn. This was history. Brenda stood by the podium, defeated, watching as her empire was dismantled ballot by ballot. The votes were counted. The accountant stood up to announce the results. "The motion carries," he said, his voice ringing with newfound confidence. "By a vote of 68 to 5, Brenda is removed from her position as president, effective immediately." A stunned silence, followed by a wave of applause and cheers. It was over. Brenda didn't say a word. She gathered her PowerPoint notes, shot me a look of pure, concentrated hatred that could strip paint, and stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her. The revolution was a success. In the weeks that followed, a strange and wonderful peace settled over Oakwood Creek Estates. An interim HOA board was formed, led by the quiet accountant who had made the motion. Their first act was to declare a 3-month moratorium on all fines and to form a committee to review and repeal 24 of the most ridiculous Brenda-era rules. The rule about hose coiling was the first to go. My garage was completed. It was magnificent. A 2-car, double-high masterpiece with a 2nd-story workshop, complete with a large picture window that looked directly out over Brenda's house. She put her house on the market a month later. Sully and his crew finished the job, and we celebrated with a barbecue in my new driveway. They presented me with a gag gift, a small, golden trophy of a Prius being carried off by a robotic claw. I placed it on my new workbench with pride. Life returned to a new kind of normal. Neighbors started talking to each other more. Kids left their toys on their lawns overnight, and the world didn't end. Mr. Henderson put up a bright pink flamingo just because he could. It was beautiful. One afternoon, I was up in my new workshop. I had finally gotten the 7/16 inches flipper bushing for my pinball machine. I was just about to install it, to place the final piece in a puzzle that had started a war. As I stood there, part in hand, I glanced out the window. A familiar squad car was cruising slowly down the street. It was Dave and Gary. Dave, the weary veteran, was driving. He slowed the car as he passed my house, his eyes drifting up to my workshop window. Our eyes met. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of pure, unadulterated, professional respect from one battle-hardened veteran to another. Then he drove on. So, what did I learn from all this? I learned that you should never, ever get between a man and his vintage pinball machine parts. I learned that sometimes the only way to deal with an unreasonable person is to become an unreasonable, but far more creative person. And I learned that a home isn't just a place you live. It's a place you have to be willing to fight for. My garage is done. It's perfect. It's my castle. And this time I've built my own moat. And as I look out over my peaceful kingdom, I can't help but wonder what comes next. I hear the new family that bought Brenda's house is planning on putting in a large, professionally landscaped rose garden. A trebuchet, I think to myself with a smile. A small, tastefully designed trebuchet could probably reach it from here. Yes, that sounds like a perfectly reasonable project.